Namaskaram. Today I'm going to be talking about verse 9 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. What Bhagavan says in this verse is iraṭṭaigaḻ, muppuḍigaḻ, eṉṭṛum, paṭṟi, iruppavām. a-vv-oṉḍṛu, eṇḍṟu, karuttiṉ-uḻ, kaṇḍāl, kaṛalum, avai. kaṇḍavarē, uṇmai, kaṇḍār. kalaṅgārē, Khan. What that means is, the first sentence is, iraṭṭaigaḻ, muppuḍigaḻ, eṇḍṛum, paṭṛi, iruppavām. That means dyads and triads exist always holding one thing. That's a very simple. That's a literal and very simple translation. But there's a lot that needs to be unpacked here to understand the full implication of this. Firstly, the terms Bhagavan uses in Tamil for dyads and triads are iraṭṭaigaḻ and muppuḍigaḻ. Iraṭṭaigaḻ simply means pairs. In this context, it means pairs of opposites, which in Sanskrit are called dvandvas. And muppuḍigaḻ is a Tamil form of the Sanskrit, the Sanskrit term triputi adapted into Tamil. Because in Sanskrit, tri means three, and in Tamil, mu means three. So it's a Tamil adaptation of a Sanskrit word. Triads means, this is a term from Indian philosophy, that is all knowledge of things other than ourselves entail three factors. That is, there has to be something that is known, there has to be a means of knowing it, and there has to be something that is knowing it. That's actually in reverse order. I put that because usually they start from what is known and then the means of knowing it and then go back to the knower. But actually, it all starts from a knower. Without a knower, obviously there cannot be anything, there cannot either be a means of knowing or anything that is known. And without a means of knowing, there cannot be any thing known. So whatever is known depends for its seeming existence on the means for knowing it. And both the means for knowing it and the thing that is known both depend on the knower. So I will elaborate upon this a bit more afterwards, but this is just a basic. So these are, to put it in simple terms in English, dyads and triads. Dyads means pairs of opposites. Triads means these three factors of objective knowledge. The main verb, so that these two are the subject. The main verb is iruppavām, which means exist. eṇḍṛum means always. oṇḍṛu means one. It's one as a noun, so it means one or one thing, the one. And paṭṛi literally means holding or clinging to. In this context, though it literally means holding, the sense in which Bhagavan is using it is in the sense of depending. So dyads and triads always exist. Well, they exist, they don't always exist, obviously. They exist always holding one thing, always depending on one thing. So, as I say, this needs to be expanded. Firstly, what is meant by the dyads? As I said, it means pairs of opposites. And examples of pairs of opposites are existence and non-existence, life and death, awareness and non-awareness, knowledge and ignorance, happiness and unhappiness, good and bad, liberation and bondage, and so on and so forth. Any pair of opposites. But these are some of the basic pairs of opposites. But what we actually are is obviously beyond all pairs of opposites. That is, for phenomena, we can say it exists, it doesn't exist. There are things that existed in the past. In the past, there There was an emperor called Ashoka. There was an empire called the Roman Empire. These existed in the past, they no longer exist. So they went through a stage of existence and they have come to a stage of non-existence. So like that, this is true of all phenomena. No phenomena exist permanently. Sometimes they exist, sometimes they don't exist. So according to them, they don't actually exist even when they seem to exist, but at least they seem to exist, but they never seem to exist always. It's only at times they seem to exist, and when they don't seem to exist, they're said to be non-existent. What we actually are, our real nature, is beyond this pair of opposites, because for our real nature is what always exists. So for it, there is no such thing as non-existence. So our existence is not like the existence of other things. Our existence is the existence that is beyond this pair of opposites. It's the absolute existence, the ultimate existence. Or that is, our existence is what actually exists. All other things merely seem to exist in the view of one thing. This one thing Bhagavan is talking about here. What that one thing is, I'll explain in a little while. So that's the dyads. The triads, as I say, it is these three factors of transitive knowledge or awareness. The technical terms used in Sanskrit are, the knower is called pramata or jnata. The means of knowing is called pramana or jnana. And what is known is called prameya or jnaya. So these are these three. When we know anything other than ourselves, these three are always involved. Now I see a PC screen in front of me, and I'm reading some writing on that PC screen. This PC screen, and we're writing on it, these are objects known by me. So how am I knowing it? In this case, I'm knowing it by seeing. Seeing is the means by which I know it. And I am a knower. Like that, all knowledge, but some knowledge we know by sensory perception. Some things we know by seeing or by hearing or by touching or tasting or smelling. Those are the one set of means by which we know things. But we don't know things only by. There are many things that we know which we've never seen or heard or tasted. We come to know by other means. We come to know, for example, by testimony. We read in the newspaper, but there's a war going on in Ukraine. This is not something that we are witnessing directly, but we are seeing directly, unless we watch it on the television. But it's something that we receive testimony. We read in the newspaper. We believe the newspapers are a reliable source of information. So this is knowledge by testimony. And most of the knowledge we have, for example, most of us are not scientists. So whatever knowledge we have of science is what we know by means of testimony. We've heard these things. We're from reliable sources. We think scientists are generally reliable people. And even the scientists, most of what they know, even about their own science, that is, scientists don't test every piece of knowledge that they learn when they go to university and when they study scientific journals. They take these as reliable sources of information, and so they trust them. And this is how most human knowledge is based on testimony. We can't verify everything for ourselves. We take things on testimony. Another major way by which we know things is by inference. Most of science, for example, is inferred knowledge. That is, observations are made, maybe experiments are done, so data is gathered. And then from this data, certain inferences are drawn. And those inferences become theories, and the theories, they first become hypotheses, which are tested. And if a hypothesis stands up to all the tests, it becomes a theory. And that theory may last for some time, and after some time more data comes, and that the theories of the past are no longer found to be satisfactory for the present data, so the theories get revised. This is how scientific knowledge develops, but it's all mainly based, I mean, apart from the observation, the inferences that are drawn from the observation are mostly done by it's inferred knowledge. That is, scientists believe in the Big Bang, for example. Nobody has actually ever witnessed the Big Bang. From all the data they have gathered, they infer this. So most not only scientific knowledge, most knowledge we have is inferred knowledge. We go to the supermarket to buy bread or rice. We believe that or fruits or vegetables, whatever it is, we believe that the food we buy in supermarkets is generally a reliable food. We don't think we're going to be poisoned by eating a mango that we bought in the supermarket or that we bought in the fruit market. Because so many times we bought fruit in those places before, and so many other people have bought fruit, so we take it, we infer that this mango is not going to poison us. Like that, most of our knowledge is based on inference. We can't be sure. This could be a poison mango. It could be it could have dangerous pesticides in it, or it could be a strange mutation. Suddenly a poisonous mango has been produced for some reason. So we can never, most of the knowledge we have, we can't be sure of, but we infer. And generally our inferences, if we base it on reliable information, our inferences are generally correct. Some knowledge we can infer by like a lot of the knowledge, a lot of our inferences are, we can't be absolutely sure. That is, having observed many times, we come to the conclusion, oh, things generally are like this, so it's likely to continue being like this. Every morning the sun has risen in the east, so we believe it's going to rise in the east every morning, because that's a reasonable inference to make. But we can never be absolutely sure. Something may happen and it may not rise tomorrow for some reason. But there's other type of knowledge that we can infer what is called deductively. That is, from certain information, if we logically consider that information. For example, a classic example of deductive inference is all men are mortal. Socrates was a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. If the two premises are true, then the inference that you draw must be true. If it is true that all men are mortal, and if it is true that Socrates was a man, then Socrates must be mortal. That's deductive inference. Those inferences we're sure of. So, like this, there's so many ways in which we know things by religious knowledge. For example, we may believe in God. We may believe God created the world in 7 days if we believe the Bible, or we may. Whatever be our religion, we take most religious knowledge is belief based on testimony. So whatever knowledge we have about anything, there's some means by which we know it. So that means is called the pramana. So there's something that is known, there's a means of knowing it, but most important of all, there is a knower. And the knower is ego. Our self as ego is the other knower. So when Bhagavan says dyads and triads always exist holding one thing, that one thing we have to infer. Because Bhagavan doesn't say it explicitly here, we have to infer that one thing is ego. Because ego is the knower. There cannot be any means of knowing anything, or anything known without a knower. So the knower is the basis of the other two members of this triputi. Likewise, all dyads, existence, non-existence, life, death, awareness, non-awareness, knowledge, ignorance, all these things are known by whom? only by ego. So these things are all objects of knowledge. So they also depend upon ego. So the correct way of understanding this sentence is that Bhagavan is saying all pairs of opposites and all these factors of objective knowledge, all objective knowledge, in other words, exist depending on ego. Why? Because it all exists only in the view of ego. In many translations, you will see it will be put, dyads and triads always exist holding or depending on one capital O, capital T, one thing, or the one with a capital O, implying that they all depend upon our real nature. That is how many people have interpreted this verse. But Bhagavan himself explained. And if we understand Bhagavan's teachings correctly, it's obvious that what Bhagavan is talking about here when he says one thing is ego, because this is actually the first. Well, no, it's not the first. In earlier verses, for example, in verse 4, Bhagavan made it clear. He said, if oneself is a form, the world and God will be likewise. If oneself is not a form, who can see their forms and how? What this implies is that only when we experience ourselves as a form do we experience other forms, do we experience the world and God as forms. If we don't experience ourselves as a form, we don't experience any forms at all. So from this, what is it that identifies itself as a form? It's only ego. So there Bhagavan is already beginning to imply that everything depends on ego. In the next verse, he says, the body is a form of 5 sheaths. Therefore, all 5 are included in the term body. Without a body, has anyone seen a world? Obviously not. We never, even in dream, when we see a dream world, we see ourselves as if we were a person within that dream world. So it's only through the 5 senses of the dream body that we take to be ourselves, but we know the dream world. So without a body, we've never seen a world. Whenever we experience a world, we experience ourselves as a body within that world. So again, this indirectly is implying only when we rise as ego, because it's only as ego that we experience ourselves as a body. Then in the next verse, verse 7, he says, verse 6, he says, the world is nothing but the 5 kinds of sense knowledge, sense impression. In other words, sights, sounds, tactile sensations, tastes, and smells. If you remove these 5, where is there any such thing as the world? What we know as the world is only these 5 kinds of sense impressions. Since the one mind knows the world by way of the 5 sense organs, is there a world apart from the mind? Again, he's clearly implying the world depends upon the mind, but sees the world. And again, in verse 7, he says, though the world, he uses the word there, he uses the word a-vv-oṇḍṟu, which means awareness, but he's using it there in the sense of mind or ego, because mind or ego is the awareness that knows the world. So he says, so I will substitute the word awareness there for ego, because that's what he's implying. Though the world and ego rise and subside simultaneously, it is only by ego that the world shines. Why is that? Because the world seems to exist only in the view of ego. And then he goes on to say that that which exists without rising or without appearing or disappearing, in other words, without rising or subsiding, as the base for the appearing and disappearing of the world and ego, that is the reality. That's our real nature, in other words. So he's already been implying that everything depends on ego, if we've understood the earlier verses correctly. This verse is first in another respect, but I'll deal with that a little later. So, and then he goes on in later verses. For example, in verse 14, he says, if the first person exists, second and third persons will exist. What's he mean by first person? He means ego, the subject, well, that which knows everything else. Second and third persons are all the objects. So if the first person exists, second and third persons will exist. In other words, if the subject exists, the objects will also exist. So because the objects exist only in the view of the subject. And so the first person is ego, second and third persons are all objects of phenomena. If oneself investigating the reality of the first person, the first person ceases to exist. That implies if by oneself investigating the reality of oneself, the first person, namely ego, ceases to exist, second and third persons coming to an end, the nature that shines as one alone is oneself, the state of oneself, or the real nature of oneself. So there he clearly implies second and third persons, in other words, all objects or phenomena, depend on the first person. It's only when the first person exists that the second and third persons seem to exist. If we investigate the first person will thereby cease to exist, and second and third persons will also cease to exist. So throughout Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu, Bhagavan is saying the same thing again and again. He's constantly pointing to the ego as the root of everything. And he says it most explicitly in verse 26. He says, a-vv-oṉɖṟu a-vv-oṉɖṟu. If ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If ego, a-vv-oṉɖṟu a-vv-oṉɖṟu. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. a-vv-oṉɖṟu. Ego itself is everything. That is, when we see this world, when we see all these phenomena, what are we seeing as phenomena? We're just seeing ourselves. So the ego is seeing itself as the dream, as all the multiplicity of phenomena. So all these are wholly dependent on ego. Because if ego doesn't exist, nothing else exists. If ego exists, everything else seems to exist. And he concludes that verse 26 by saying, therefore, therefore, investigating what it is, that means investigating what ego is giving up everything. Why is that? Because if we investigate ego will cease to exist, as he says, for example, in verse 14. If oneself investigating the reality of the first person ceases to exist. So the nature of the ego is to rise, stand, and flourish by attending to things other than itself. But if it attends to itself, it doesn't find any such thing as ego. So it subsides and dissolves back into its source, into its underlying reality, which is pure awareness, which is our real nature. So so as I say, he ends verse 26 by saying, therefore, investigating what it is giving up everything. Because if we investigate ego, we thereby give up ego. And when we give up ego, we give up everything else, because everything else depends. If ego doesn't exist, nothing else exists, because everything, it depends on, for its semi-existence on the semi-existence of ourself as ego. So if we understand the main theme, this is one of the main themes that is running throughout Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu, but everything depends for its semi-existence upon ego. So we have to understand when Bhagavan says dyads and triads exist always holding or depending on one thing. What is that one thing? Bhagavan isn't talking about our real nature. Our real nature is the ultimate basis, but what he's talking about here is they depend upon ego. If ego comes into existence, all the dyads and triads come into existence. If ego doesn't exist, dyads and triads do not exist. This we can easily infer from verse 26 and from so many other verses. So this is what Bhagavan means here. So, as I say, most translations are misleading by capitalizing the one, by making it sound like it's some one with a capital O. No, it's not. It's just ego. So that Bhagavan is referring to here. But a further clue is given in the next sentence, because in the next sentence he says, if one sees within the mind what that one thing is, they will slip off. They mean the dyads and triads. Why will they slip off? Just because you see within the mind what that one thing is? Because that one thing is ego. If you see within the mind what that ego is, you find there's no such thing as ego at all. So since ego ceases to exist, the dyads and triads cease to exist. This is what we have to infer. This is what Bhagavan made clear in verse 14, that if one's self-investigating the truth of oneself, if investigating the truth of the first person ceases to exist, second and third persons will also cease to exist. So it's exactly the same thing the Bhagavan is saying. So this is what I said. This second sentence, this is the first time in Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu Bhagavan is introducing this idea. But by investigating ego will cease to exist and everything else will cease to exist. This is something that he emphasizes in so many ways, in so many of the other verses. For example, I've already pointed out the example in verse 14. In verse 25, that's a verse in which Bhagavan refers to ego as a formless phantom or formless evil spirit. He says, grasping form, it comes into existence. Grasping form, it stands. Grasping and feeding on forms, it flourishes abundantly. Leaving form, it grasps form. In other words, what he implies in those sentences is that the very nature of ego is to be constantly grasping form. But instead of grasping form, if ego grasps itself, what happens? That is what he says in the next sentence. Teḍiṇāl otam pidikam. If sought, it takes flight. What that means is, if ego investigates itself to see who am I, ego will subside and dissolve back into its source, and what will remain is the underlying reality, namely the pure awareness that we actually are. So this is one of the fundamental principles of Bhagavan's teaching, that if we investigate ego will cease to exist. And when ego ceases to exist, everything else will cease to exist. That is what he implies here. And this, incidentally, is one of the unique aspects of Bhagavan's teachings. I don't think in any spiritual text or any spiritual teaching has been given so clearly that the nature of ego, as Bhagavan says in verse 25, as he implies in verse 25, the nature of ego is to rise, stand, and flourish by attending to forms. Since ego is a formless phantom, attending to form means attending to things other than itself. So long as ego is attending to things other than itself, it will rise and flourish and do very well for itself. But if instead of attending to other things, if it attends to itself, Teḍiṇāl otam pidikam is sought, it takes flight, it will subside and disappear. As far as I'm aware, in no scripture before Bhagavan has it been said so clearly, but this is the nature of ego. And if we think about it, this is very logical, because ego is the false, as Bhagavan said, ego is the false awareness, I am this body. Whenever we're aware of ourselves as I am this body, that means we've risen as ego, and we are consequently aware of other things. So the two defining characteristics of ego is that as ego, we are always aware of ourselves as I am this body, and we are consequently aware of things other than ourselves. So it is only when we're aware of things other than ourselves, but even the body is something other than ourselves, but what we now take to be ourselves is actually something other than ourselves. So only when we're attending to things other than ourselves, including this body and mind and everything, do we seem to be ego. But if instead of attending to other things, if we attend to ourselves, does any such thing as ego actually exist? No, it doesn't actually exist. It merely seems to exist. It seems to exist because we don't look at it carefully. It is like if we see something lying on the ground in the dim light of dusk, we may mistake it to be a snake. So long as we don't look at it carefully, we will continue to be afraid of it because it looks like a snake. Though it's not moving, it could at any moment start moving. It could suddenly move towards us and bite us. So we're afraid to go too close. But if Bhagavan is accompanying us, Bhagavan will assure us, no, it is not a snake, it's only a rope. And if we're still not convinced, he'll say, I mean, though we may trust in Bhagavan's words, still there'll be a lingering fear there because it looks very much like a snake. So to convince us, Bhagavan will say, look at it very carefully. If we trust Bhagavan's words enough and have the courage to look at it carefully, what do we see? Oh, it's not a snake, it's only a rope. Likewise with ego. We seem to be ego because we haven't looked at ourselves closely enough. If we look at ourselves closely enough, we will see that what we actually are is pure awareness, not this ego at all. So ego seems to exist. We seem to be ego only so long as we do not attend to ourselves. That's why Bhagavan often said, but the reason ego seems to exist is because of avvichara or pramada. Pramada is another term for avvichara. Avvichara means non-investigation. Pramada means negligence. In the sense of, in this context, it means self-negligence, because we haven't looked at ourselves closely enough. That's what avvichara means. Avvichara is the opposite of vichara. Vichara is to attend to ourselves carefully. Avvichara is to fail to attend to ourselves carefully enough. So we seem to be ego only because we are not looking at ourselves. We're looking elsewhere. If we look at ourselves to see what we actually are, we will see that we are pure awareness, and therefore we have never been ego. No such thing as ego has ever existed. And since everything else depends for its seeming existence upon the seeming existence of ourself as ego, as soon as we see ourselves as pure awareness, everything else will cease to exist. As he says here, if one sees within the mind what that one thing, namely ego, is, dyads and triads will slip off. So in this verse, Bhagavan is giving the very core principles of his teachings. Firstly, but all other things. And when we think of it, dyads and triads covers everything, because, I mean, we see so many pairs of opposites in the world around us. So the world is full of pairs of opposites. And everything that we know fits it, is an element of that all objects of knowledge are what are called prameya, or the means by which we know whatever objects of knowledge we know. They are called pramana. And both the prameya and the pramana exist only in the view of ourself as pramata. Pramata is ego, the knower or subject. So what Bhagavan says here is very, very radical, because he's basically saying that everything, I mean, he's saying what he says in verse 26, but in different words, that all these dyads and triads that make up all our experience all depend only upon ego. And if we look within ourselves to see what is this ego, if we look within the mind to see what is this ego, that in mind, here he's using the term mind as the totality of all thoughts. He sometimes uses the term mind to mean the totality of all thoughts. So all the dyads and triads are nothing but thoughts. As Bhagavan said, all phenomena are thoughts. The whole world is nothing but thoughts. So among all the thoughts, if we look within these thoughts to see what is the one thing, that one thing is the knower. So if we look within the mind to see who is the knower of all this, the knower will cease to exist, and all these other things will cease to exist along with it. That's what he means by kaṛalum avai. Avai means they, referring to dyads and triads. Kaṛalum means slip off. It will, in other words, it will cease to exist, is what it implies. And then in the last two sentences, what he says, in the next sentence, he says, kaṇḍavarē uṇmai kaṇḍār. That literally means only those who have seen the reality. So what's he mean by that? What he implies is only those who have seen the non-existence of ego are those who have seen the reality. That is, only when we look at the snake carefully enough and see that it's actually a rope, we thereby see the non-existence of the snake, and thereby we are seeing the reality, the underlying reality, which is just a rope. So if we can be said to have seen the reality only when we have seen the non-existence of ego. So who is it who sees the reality? It's obviously cannot be ego, because we have to see the non-reality of ego. So who sees the reality? The reality alone knows the reality, because the reality of ourself, the reality of all things, is pure awareness. What we actually are, that is the reality. So when we see ourselves as we actually are, we cease to be ego and remain as we actually are. So what knows pure awareness is only pure awareness. As Bhagavan often used to say, jnaname jnani. That is, jnana alone is the jnani. Jnana in this context means pure awareness. Jnani means not what knows pure awareness. So what is it that knows pure awareness? Only pure awareness knows pure awareness. So if we look within to see what we actually are, we will see that we are just pure awareness. And by seeing ourselves as pure awareness, we as Bhagavan says in verse 26 of Upadeshundya, Tanai iratale tanai arilam. Being oneself alone is knowing oneself. Oneself here means pure awareness. So being pure awareness is alone knowing pure awareness. Ego can never know pure awareness, because pure awareness cannot be an object of knowledge. Only pure awareness can know pure awareness. And secondly, ego is the false awareness, I am this body. So long as we are aware of ourselves as I am this body, we are not aware of ourselves as pure awareness. So only when we've seen, by looking within and seeing the non-existence of ego, and therefore the non-existence of everything else, have we truly seen what is real, namely ourself, our own being, which is pure awareness. And then he says, kalaṅgārē, they will not be confused. That implies they will not be confused by ever seeing anything other than themselves. That is, all these dyads and triads are a mere appearance. They're not at all real. They seem to exist only when we look away from ourselves. If we see ourselves as we actually are, we will never again see all these other things, so we will never be confused. And then he says, Khan, see. Now, he's telling us, see, that implies see what you act. We can take it to mean see the truth of all that is said here, but it also implies see what you actually look within the mind to see who is the seer, to see that one thing. When one sees within the mind what that one thing is, they will slip off. So he's saying see within the mind what that one thing is. One other thing I didn't say when I was talking about the first sentence. In the Kalivemba version, Bhagavan expanded this first sentence by adding just one word before the dyads and triads, iraṭṭaigaḻ, muppuḍigaḻ. The one word he added is uṇmai. Uṇmai, vin means space or sky. So uṇmai means, literally it means skyness. So dyads and triads, skyness, exist always holding one thing. So what does he mean by skyness? This is a very very nice way of expressing, but the dyads and triads are unreal like the blueness of the sky. That is what he implies by this. In one word, he gives this clue. Skyness means blueness. The blueness of the sky is a mere appearance. The sky isn't actually blue. When the sun sets, the sky no longer looks blue, it looks black. Why does it look blue in the daytime and black at nighttime? What is the real color of the sky? It looks blue in the daytime because of the way the light of the sun is refracted through the Earth's atmosphere. It gives the appearance of blueness, but actually the sky is not blue at all. That's a mere appearance. So what Bhagavan implies by this word uṇmai is that the dyads and triads are as unreal as the blueness of the sky. They're a mere appearance. They don't actually exist, they merely seem to exist. And in whose view do they seem to exist? Only in the view of ego. So what do they depend upon for their seeming existence? Only upon ego. So this illusory appearance of dyads and triads depends upon the one who sees this illusory appearance. Who sees the illusory appearance? Only ego. That is, this illusory appearance of dyads and triads does not exist in the view of our real nature. Our real nature is pure awareness. Pure awareness doesn't know anything other than itself. So dyads and triads exist only in the view of ego. That is why we're not aware of any dyads or triads. We're not aware of anything other than ourselves in sleep. In sleep, all we know is I am. We don't know anything else whatsoever. Why? Because in sleep, we don't rise as ego. Therefore, nothing else seems to exist. When we rise as ego in waking and dream, dyads and triads seem to exist. That is, our experience of waking and dream is saturated with dyads and triads. The whole thing is all exists within this framework of dyads and triads. Remove the dyads and triads, and there's no world. There's not even a seer of the world, because the ego upon which the dyads and triads depend is itself one of the three elements of that triad. So everything depends upon ego, and like all the other members of these dyads and triads, ego is as unreal as the blueness of the sky. It doesn't actually exist at all. So this is a very, very important verse, and just as to provide some continuity with what goes on after this, from verse 10 onwards, 10, 11, 12, and 13, Bhagavan is talking about one of the most basic of the dyads. That is the dyad of knowledge and ignorance. Knowledge and ignorance. This is one, because that is the triads. These are all. That is, they are. A triad is it's the elements of knowledge. That is the knower, the knowing, or the means of knowing, and the known. So the dyad of knowledge and ignorance is a very, very basic dyad. So Bhagavan takes that up for analysis in the next 4 verses. So those we'll be talking about in January, February, March, and April. So I just wanted to say, so this verse is a very important introduction to these 4 very important verses that we're going to be talking about for the next 4 months. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramana.
Thank you, Michael. There's a question from Lean. If I can maybe get an answer to my question. If the ego is in both waking and dreaming state, why do we feel we move from a peaceful state to a kind of anxious state upon waking up in the morning?
Dream is not peaceful. In dream, we have so many anxieties. That is, ego is there only in waking and dream. Now, what is the nature of waking and dream? In both waking and dream, we experience ourselves as a body, and we consequently experience other things. Because we experience ourselves as a body, anxiety is naturally there. In dream, we often in very anxious situations, we often find ourselves to be in danger of one sort or another. We may be running away from a monster, or we may be on the edge of a precipice or something, all sorts of dangers we face in dreams. So we often experience anxiety, fear, and we also see objects of desire. So waking and dream are actually, according to Bhagavan, what we take to be, we always take our present state to be waking. But even when we're at night, when we're dreaming, when our sleep is interrupted by dreams, in those dreams we seem to be awake. So our current dream always seems to us to be waking. Other dreams seem to be dreams, but actually they're all just dreams. If you want to be free of anxiety, don't rise as ego. In sleep, when we don't rise as ego, then we are free of anxiety. The only problem with sleep is, from the perspective of ego, sleep seems to be a temporary state. It's a state that we were in, but we've now come out of. So what we seek to attain is the eternal sleep, the real sleep, the sleep of pure awareness. That is sleep is a state of manolaya, a temporary dissolution of mind. We're not looking for a temporary solution. We want a permanent solution. The permanent solution is called manonasa, destruction or annihilation of mind. That is achieved only by investigating who am I, thereby seeing thereby seeing what we actually are, namely pure awareness. We cease to mistake ourselves to be this body, and therefore ego is annihilated.
So in the question, if ego is there in the dream state also, and ego is there in the waking state also, why do we feel like we're moving from a peaceful state to a kind of anxious state upon waking up?
But yes, but that implies that dream is a peaceful state. But dream is no more peaceful than our present state. Even in our present state, sometimes we seem to be in a relatively peaceful conditions. Likewise in dreams, some dreams are relatively peaceful, but we never know. The next moment, some problem may arise. So waking and dream are both the same. That is, the degree of anxiety that we experience in the waking state is no greater than the degree of anxiety we experience in dream state. We are free of anxiety only when we are free of ego, as for example in sleep.
In deep sleep.
Deep sleep, yes, exactly.
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay, right.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, Len. Okay, so Robert Boyer is asking, besides awareness, does anything else really exist?
No. Simple. Everything else seems to exist in the view of ego. Ego is a form of awareness, but it's not the pure awareness. Ego is the adjunct mixed awareness. That is our real nature. What we actually are is pure awareness. Pure awareness is aware of itself as I am. That is, pure awareness is our being. So our being is I am. So as pure awareness, we're always aware I am, but we're never aware of anything other than ourselves. That's why it's called pure awareness. We have to be a little bit careful with this term pure awareness, because in different systems of philosophy, when they talk of pure awareness, they imply different things. For example, in Sankhya philosophy, they say Purusha is pure awareness. But what they mean by pure awareness in Sankhya is mere awareness. That is, Purusha is nothing but awareness, but it's aware of all of Prakriti. Prakriti appears only in the view of Purusha. That's a dualistic system of philosophy. But in Advaita, when we talk about pure awareness, Suddha Chaitanya, it means awareness that is not aware of anything other than itself. You will find, if you listen to lectures on Vedanta, you will find often because the lecturers, they lack practical experience, they will sometimes say as if pure awareness is seeing all this. They say Sakshi Chaitanya, the witness consciousness. And that witness consciousness is pure awareness, and it's knowing all this. They haven't understood what the correct implication of the term pure awareness. Pure awareness means awareness that is pure. It has no defilement. So there are no objects of awareness in pure awareness. So our real nature is pure awareness. That is awareness that is not aware of anything other than itself. Why is it not aware of anything other than itself? Because it's real awareness, and there is nothing other than that. So that is the pure awareness, which is our real nature, alone is what actually exists. This is what Bhagavan implies, for example, in the first sentence of the 7th paragraph of Nana. Bhagavan says, Yatātamai Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu. What actually exists is only Atma-swarupa. Atma-swarupa means the real nature of ourself. What is the real nature of ourself? It is pure awareness. And he says the same thing in verse 13 of Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu, which we'll be talking about after a few months. He begins verse 13 of Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu by saying, Jnanamam tane me. That means oneself, who is jnana, alone is real. Jnana there means pure awareness. So our self is pure awareness, alone is real. Then in the very next sentence, he says, awareness, that is nanabam jnanam. Jnana, knowledge or awareness of multiplicity is ignorance. So long as we are aware of multiplicity, that is ignorance. And why? Because who is aware of multiplicity? It's only ego. It's only in the view of ego that multiplicity seems to exist. So in the view of pure awareness, there is nothing other than pure awareness. That alone is what is real. We can understand this if we consider our experience. What is the one thing that we experience always? It's our own being, I am. All other things appear and disappear. Even our seeming existence as ego. As ego, we always identify ourselves as a person. I am Robert, or I am Kumar, or I am Michael, I am whoever. That is ego that is aware of itself as such. But in sleep, we're aware of ourselves without being aware of ourselves as I am Robert, or I am Kumar, or I am Michael, or I am anyone. We're aware of ourselves as just I am. So that in sleep, we're not aware of anything other than ourselves. So sleep is the state of pure awareness. That same pure awareness that exists in sleep exists even now, but it is obscured by our seeming awareness of other things. So the mere awareness I am is pure awareness. That awareness I am mixed and conflated with adjuncts is ego. Is that a clear answer?
Robert Boyer, could you respond to Michael, please? And also, there is a follow-up comment you made. You can elaborate on that, because it's not clear to me. You said, what about the numbers 1, 2, 3? You can unmute, please. Thank you.
I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
I asked, and you answered the question, is there anything else that's really, really existent besides awareness?
Yes.
And you said no, but I still have this guttural feeling that the numbers like 1, 2, and 3 really, really exist. And I wish you could fix that in me.
Okay. Do they exist in your sleep?
Definitely.
Yes?
Definitely.
How? Have you ever been aware of more than one thing in sleep?
Just awareness.
Just
But
awareness.
Whenever I'm aware, I keep thinking 1, 2, 3, ...
Only in waking and dream you can think 1, 2, 3... ... In sleep you cannot think 1, 2, 3... ... Numbers are just ideas. We see so many objects. We can count the objects in front of us, but all those are just thoughts.
I can be accused, I'm afraid, of being a Platonist.
Right.
Because I think of the numbers as being eternal and real.
Right. They are as real as the mind but knows them. Numbers are objects of knowledge. The objects of knowledge without an intellect to enumerate the numbers. There are no. So the intellect is the means by which you know the numbers. So you are the knower. Your intellect is the instrument by which you know these numbers, and you know about the relationships of numbers, and you can study mathematics. And people spend a whole lifetime studying mathematics, but all they're studying are objects of knowledge. If the mathematician would investigate themselves to see who am I, that the knower of the numbers, namely ego, would dissolve back into its source, and all numbers would dissolve along with it. Numbers are just phenomena. They have no existence independent of ego.
Thank you.
That is why this philosophy is called Advaita. Advaita means no two-ness. In one of the Upanishads, it is said that the nature of Brahman is ekam eva advaitiyam. That means one only without a second. That is the significance of Advaita. There is no second thing. Because since pure awareness alone exists, there cannot be nothing other than that exists. Everything else exists only in the view of ourself as ego. That's why we don't experience any numbers in sleep. All we experience in sleep, in deep sleep, in dreamless sleep, is our own being. I am. Our own being is one only without a second. Now so many other things seem to exist, but all these other things that seem to exist, in whose view do they seem to exist? Only in the view of ego. So all these other things, including all numbers, depend for their semi-existence upon the semi-existence of ourself as ego. And even this ego is not a real existence because it appears and disappears. So our ego depends for its semi-existence upon the real existence of ourself. So what actually exists is only ourself and nothing else. There is no second thing.
Thank you, Michael.
I want Robert. I want to hear from Robert. Are you satisfied or not?
My only response is that I think that the numbers are eternally present to any consciousness or awareness that I can imagine.
Yeah, because any consciousness or awareness that you can imagine is still it's a mental fabrication. Imagination means mental fabrication. Because we are thinking numbers are just concepts.
But let me put it a silly way.
Yeah, right.
There's no getting away from numbers.
I get away from numbers every night when I go to sleep. I'm free of all numbers. And if you don't get away from numbers, there's something very wrong with your sleep.
Well, I'm afraid that's the problem. I think I read too much Plato.
Yeah. Okay. Leave Plato aside. We have no problem with Plato. Who is it who read Plato? Look within yourself to find the one who knows Plato, the one who's got these ideas about numbers. If you know the truth of the knower, you will know the truth of everything else. When you know the truth of the knower, everything known will cease to exist. That's what Bhagavan is teaching us in this verse. So numbers are objects of knowledge. Those objects of knowledge depend upon their seeming existence, upon some means of knowing them. And the means of knowing depends upon a knower. You are the knower. You are the one. Now you are seeing yourself as many, but what is real is only yourself, the one.
Well, I think it may have been Kronecker, the mathematician, who said that God created the integers and then created everything else in mathematics. And that's just another silliness. I just can't seem to get away from the presence of the numbers, in addition to whatever dim sense of the one awareness that I have been able to get to.
Do you recognize the fact that you were aware in your sleep? You were aware of your existence in your sleep?
I think so.
Right. Okay. That is, we can, if we consider it carefully, we are clearly aware of having been in a state in which we were not aware of anything. So we can only be aware of having been in that state if we were aware of being in that state when we were in that state. Of course, we didn't think of it as a state where I don't know anything. All we know is our own being in sleep. So the more we go deep in this practice of self-investigation, the clearer it will become to us that the reality of our own being. So it will become more and more clear to us. Though we can, at first we can understand it by conceptual analysis, by thinking carefully about it, we can understand, but we continue to be aware. We don't cease to be aware of our own being, even in sleep. But in order for that dim knowledge that we have to become a clear knowledge, we have to look within ourselves. The more we attend to our own being, the more we will recognize that our being is, firstly, it is the basis of all other things. And secondly, it is distinct from all other things. Our being does not depend upon anything else. All other things depend upon our being. But our being does not depend upon anything else. And our being is awareness. So that our being awareness, that Sat-Chit alone is what remains in sleep. And that is one without a second. The second things, all other things, appear only when we rise as ego. And we rise as ego only in waking and dream. So it's a matter, all these things become more and more clear to us to the extent to which we look within. Otherwise, if we are trying to understand these things with the outward-looking mind, it will still remain vague. Yes, I sort of get it. It's sort of vaguely I understand it, but you can't understand it clearly. You can understand it clearly only to the extent to which you follow this practice that Bhagavan taught us of looking within more and more and more, and thereby separating our existence from the seeming existence of all other things. Numbers seem to exist. Do they actually exist? The only thing whose existence we can absolutely be sure of is our own existence. Because all other things seem to exist only in the view of ourselves as ego. So they depend upon ego for their seeming existence. Whereas our existence, we exist independent of ego, because whether ego appears or not, we always exist. Ego appears in waking and dream, disappears in sleep. We exist in all three states. So it's only in the view of ego that all multiplicity seems to exist. Numbers and so on seem to exist.
Yeah.
Even the God who someone said created the integers, even that God seems to exist as an external being, creator of everything, only when we rise as ego. So the ultimate creator, the creator even of the seemingly other God, is only ego. When we don't rise as ego, God remains as he actually is, namely as our own being. That is the real God.
It's good.
Well, I'm sure you're right. However, I'm just accepting that because, as you were talking about people accepting the work of scientists and newspapers, I trust you, but I don't see it.
Right. That is what, but Bhagavan doesn't ask us to believe him. Bhagavan often used to say, do not believe what you do not know.
Right.
So he expects us to make it our own knowledge. So how can we make it our own knowledge? That is, whether numbers exist or not, they depend upon ourselves as the knower of them. So let us investigate. We cannot know the truth of what is known without knowing the truth of the knower. So let us first investigate the knower. And then after we know the truth of the knower, if there's anything else to know, we can investigate that then. So let us first focus on turning our attention within to know, who am I, the one who knows all these numbers, the one to whom all these numbers appear.
There is a quote from in Atma-vichara Praharanam, where Lord Shiva tells Guha, it is beyond the ken of logicians.
Yes. It had logic is a very useful tool, but logic is all about connections. It's all about cause and effect and so on. But logic is a tool of ego. Right. Logic is relevant only when we rise as ego. In sleep, we need no logic, because you don't need any logic to know I am.
Right.
So the truth is beyond all logic, beyond all mental conceptions, beyond all numbers, beyond everything. It is just pure awareness.
Good. Thank you, Michael. And thank you, Robert. So the next question is from Bruce. Bruce, could you, because your question is not clear to me, could you go ahead and ask it yourself?
The fundamental problem of ego identification, I think the question I'm trying to say is the identification with ego is like looking at a mirror reflection and saying that's real. Okay. And when one looks at a reflection and thinks that reflection is real, it justifies all other reflections that follow suit. And so I guess I was trying to indicate that verse 22 of Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu seems to be very pertinent in answering the points of verse 9. And if you have any comments on that, that would be really helpful.
Yes, that is true. Verse 22 is a very, very important verse. What Bhagavan says in verse 22 is, except by turning the mind back within and thereby completely immersing it in God, who shines within that mind, giving light to the mind, how to fathom God by the mind, consider. So what does Bhagavan mean by this? That is, God is that which is shining in the mind, giving light to the mind. That means God is that pure awareness, I am, which shines within the mind, giving the mind the light of awareness by which it knows everything else. The mind knows other things, not by pure awareness, but only by the mind is a reflected awareness, or a semblance of awareness, a likeness of awareness. It's not the original awareness. The original awareness is what Bhagavan refers to here as paṭṭhi. Paṭṭhi means God or the Lord. That is our own real nature. That is what we actually are. So that's what shines in our mind as I am, as our own being, giving light to the mind, enabling the mind to know all other things. So, and I think in the Kalivemba version, he adds one word here, which is very important. That is the word he adds in the Kali, but he adds a relative clause in the Kalivemba version, evayam kānam, which sees everything. So, except by turning the mind, which sees everything, back within, and thereby completely immersing it in God. How to see God by the mind. So in this Kali-Vemba version, he points out that mind is what knows everything else. So all other things seem to exist only in the view of the mind. And how the mind is able to know all other things? Only by the light, but it borrows from the Lord who shines within the mind. The Lord who shines within the mind is our own being, that pure awareness I am. That lends light to the mind, enabling the mind to know all other things. So the only way to know God, who is the one who shines within the mind, is to turn the mind back within and thereby to immerse it in God. In other words, because when we turn the mind back within, mind here means ego. When ego turns within to see itself, it thereby subsides and dissolves back into its source, which is the God referred to here. So yes, this is a very, very important verse, verse 22. There was something you said, Bruce, when you started, and I wanted to comment on it. I'm just trying to remember what it was.
The error of ego.
I know what you said. You said, when we identify with ego, who is it who identifies with ego?
Exactly. The error of ego.
Yeah, that is, ego is what identifies itself with the person. Ego is the false identity. It's not that there's some other I that is identifying with ego. Ego is that which identifies with the phenomena. So ego, as for example, in verse 24, Bhagavan explains what is ego. It's not the body, that is the body consisting of 5 sheaths, because the body consisting of 5 sheaths is jada and is not aware of anything. And it's not Sat-Chit, because Sat-Chit doesn't rise. In between this body and Sat-Chit, one thing rises as the extent of a body. That the one thing I rises at the extent of a body. That one thing I is ego. So ego is not something with which we identify. We seem to be ego when we identify ourselves with a body. So we shouldn't think in terms of identifying ourselves with ego. When we identify ourselves with the body, we thereby seem to be ego. Is that clarification clear?
Yeah, it's subtle. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Because if we identify with ego, then who is it who's identifying with ego? We've got another I behind that ego who's identifying. So that just we shouldn't get into confusion. We keep things simple. There's the body consisting of 5 sheaths, which is not I, because it's jada and it's therefore not aware of itself as I. There's the reality Sat-Chit, which is what we actually are. In between, that's something that is it's not the body, because it's aware of itself as I. And it's not Sat-Chit, because Sat-Chit doesn't rise, but this rises. So it's neither Sat-Chit nor is it the body. But it borrows Bhagavan says it's in between. In between has two implications there. Firstly, ego is the link between our real nature and all this appearance. This body and all other phenomena. Secondly, when we talk about in between, consider an example. Supposing you read a story in the newspaper, and you're doubtful. Is this really true? So you ask a friend of yours, is this story true or false? Your friend may say it's neither true nor false. It's somewhere in between. What do they mean by saying it's somewhere in between? They mean it is not entirely true. It is not entirely false. It's a mixture of fact and fiction. It's got some elements of truth, some elements of falsehood. So it's somewhere in between. In that sense also, Bhagavan is using that term. Because ego, it is not the body, but it borrows the properties of body. It limits itself to the extent of a body. And ego is not Sat-Chit. But from Sat-Chit, it borrows its existence and its awareness. So it's neither Sat Chit nor the body, but it borrows the properties of both. So ego is what identifies. So when we identify ourselves as a body, we who identify ourselves as I am this body, I am Bruce, or I am Michael, or whoever, that is ego.
That identification as the body is a reflection.
Yes.
The error of that reflection, if we can say such a thing, the error of that reflection, the identification with that reflection, is what spawns Maya.
Yes,
that it's because it's all linked to the 5 koshas. So that preliminary error of the identification with the ego as body, if you want to, that's the better, I guess.
Yeah.
Then it incorporates the cycle, and then it can only recognize reflections as real.
Yeah.
You see, it's like that core mistake of identifying a reflection as being real makes all reflections real. And that's the error, as opposed to the core reality, which is not a reflection, but is self-shining.
Yeah, that is, ego is sometimes referred to as a reflection of awareness. That is, pure awareness is not aware of anything other than itself. Ego is an awareness that is aware of things other than itself. But whatever ego is aware of, whatever other thing the ego is aware of, doesn't actually exist. So being aware of what doesn't actually exist is not real awareness. It's only a semblance of awareness. So there's a word in Sanskrit, chidabhasa. Abhasa means a semblance, a likeness. By extension, it also means a reflection, because if you look in the mirror, what you see in the mirror, the reflection is you're not seeing yourself in the mirror, you're seeing a likeness of yourself. So the original meaning, the basic meaning of abhasa is a likeness or a semblance. The secondary meaning is a reflection. So ego is called a reflection because it is not the original awareness. It is only a semblance of that original awareness. And it's only in the view of that reflection that all other things seem to exist. Right. So regarding Maya, you said ego is the root of Maya. Yes, that is true. Maya is said to consist of 2 powers, the Avarana Shakti and the Vikshepa Shakti. Avarana is the veiling. So as ego contains both these powers within itself, that is, the basic form of ego is I am this body. That is the veiling, because what we actually are is just I am. But when we identify ourselves with the body, our real nature as the pure I am is thereby obscured. So that is the avarana, the veiling. And as a result of that, we are aware of all this multiplicity. That awareness of multiplicity is called vikshepa. Vikshepa means dissipation. So as soon as we experience ourselves as I am this body, we are consequently aware of all this multiplicity. So as Bhagavan said, Maya is nothing but ego.
It's like a kaleidoscope.
Yeah. Because the 2 defining characteristics of ego, as ego, we are always aware of ourselves as I am this body, and we are consequently always aware of things other than ourselves. That is the avarana and the vikshepa. Both are included in ego. So that's why Bhagavan's analysis, that is what Bhagavan says, does not contradict anything that is said in the old text. But he clarifies it, because what is, in the old text they say avidya, they talk about avidya, ignorance. But ignorance is nothing but ego. Ego is the false awareness I am this body. That is what is meant by ignorance. We never cease to be aware I am, but we cease to be aware of ourselves as we actually are, because we're aware of ourselves as I am this body. So ego is avarana, ego is avidya, ego is maya, ego is everything. And by pointing out that ego is the root cause of everything, Bhagavan also makes Vedanta very practical, because he then says, what is the nature of this ego? Ego rises, stands, and flourishes by attending to things other than itself. If instead of attending to other things, if it attends to itself, it will subside and disappear. This is something that hasn't been explained so clearly in any of the ancient texts. So Bhagavan has greatly simplified and clarified Vedanta. And most importantly of all, he has highlighted the practice. Because if we understand the nature of ego, we will also understand the nature of the practice. So long as we're attending to anything other than ourselves, we're feeding and nourishing ego. In order to surrender this ego, we need to attend to ourselves. So attending to ourselves is the path of jnana, the self-investigation. It is also the path of bhakti, because it's the self-surrender. So Bhagavan has tied all of Vedanta together so simply by pointing out the nature of ego, and that ego itself is what is called avidya. Ego itself is what is called maya. Ego is the root of all problems. And the simple way to get rid of ego is simply to attend to it, to look at it.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks.
Rajat Sanchit is asking, is there any particular reason why none of the verses of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu seem to talk about vasanas? Or is any verse implicitly dealing with the subject of vasanas and how to eradicate them?
There's no particular reason, but Bhagavan had dealt with the subject of vasana very thoroughly in Nana. So perhaps he felt it wasn't necessary to elaborate more on it in Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. But vasanas are very clearly implied in Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. For example, take verse 25 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. That is the verse where Bhagavan revealed the nature of ego. Ego is a formless phantom. It comes into existence grasping form. It stands grasping form. Grasping and feeding on forms, it flourishes abundantly. Leaving form, it grasps form. From that, we have to understand the nature of ego is grasping. The very nature of ego is to be constantly grasping form. Since ego is formless, it has no form of its own, whatever forms it grasps are things other than itself. So all those forms are what are called vishayas. So the ego has a very strong inclination to cling to vishayas, because clinging to vishayas is the means by which it comes into existence and survives and flourishes. So the Vishaya vasanas are very, very clearly implied there, because what is the nature of ego? To be constantly clinging to Vishayas. That inclination to cling to Vishayas is Vishaya vasanas. So if we understand Bhagavan's teachings correctly, we will see that though he hasn't directly talked about Vishaya vasanas, the reason for Vishaya vasanas is in a sense clarified by that verse 25. So we shouldn't take Bhagavan's teachings in isolation. If we want to understand, if we want to have a deep understanding of any aspect of Bhagavan's teachings, we have to see the connection with other aspects. So what Bhagavan has discussed thoroughly in Nana about Vishaya vasanas, in a sense, this verse 25 is explaining why ego has Vishaya vasanas, why it's the very nature of ego to have Vishaya vasanas, because it depends on holding on to the Vishayas in order ego seems to exist only when it's holding on to Vishayas. Vishayas means objects or phenomena, what he refers to in Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu's form. So we need to understand all these connections. Then his teachings will become more and more clear to us.
Thank you, Michael. There's a question from Sandy. If world comes into existence after my ego comes into existence, why is my ego creating this world full of pain and suffering?
That if the world doesn't come into existence after ego rises, as soon as ego rises, the world comes into existence. That is, as Bhagavan says in verse 7, which we talked about a couple of months ago, though the world and awareness there means awareness of the world, that's ego, though the awareness that knows the world is ego. So though the world and awareness rise and subside simultaneously, it is by the awareness alone that the world shines. That awareness by which the world shines is ego, because it's only in the view of ego that the world seems to exist. So your question is, why does ego come into existence? Bhagavan says that's an invalid question. Before asking why or how ego comes into existence, first find out what this ego is. Find out whether it's ever actually come into existence. Ego seems to have come into existence so long as we're looking at other things. But if we look at ourselves, no such thing as ego is to be found. Since there's no such thing as ego, it has never come into existence, and therefore the question becomes redundant. So before asking why the son of a barren woman was born, how was the son of a barren woman born, first find out whether there is any such thing as the son of a barren woman. Obviously, the son of a barren woman is a logical impossibility, because if a woman is barren, that means she's got no children. If she's got children, she's not barren. So just like the ego is said to be as unreal as the son of a barren woman, though it seems to exist, if we investigate it, we find it has no existence whatsoever. But it's no use telling ourselves, ego doesn't exist. Nowadays, there are neo-Advaitins who say, we don't have to worry. There's no such thing as ego. Everything is awareness, no problem. But we are still suffering. So that's not really, that's obviously that is trivializing the problem, right? So long as we seem to be ego, we have a big problem. So we have to deal with this problem. How do we deal with this problem? By investigating ego. Because only by investigating ego can we actually see what we actually are. When we see what we actually are, we will see that we were never ego.
Thank you, Michael. So Shohan is asking a question. If person A can only see the wavelength of blue, then is it our real nature? Then is it true that our real nature can see the wavelength of red, given that red is a true color? Or is it that our real nature can see all possible wavelengths and know them as shadows? Then he clarified a bit more, saying, so the implication is our real nature can see the falsities and know them as false.
No.
So by real nature, I think he's referring to ego here.
Yeah, our real nature does not know anything false.
Right.
What is unreal appears only in the view of what is unreal. All phenomena, all the red wavelengths and blue wavelengths and all phenomena of all kinds, all numbers, everything exists only in the view of ego. They are all unreal because they exist in the view of ego, because ego itself is unreal. In the view of pure awareness, there is nothing other than pure awareness, because pure awareness is alone real. But real cannot know the unreal. Only the unreal can know the unreal.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michael.
So whatever is known by ego is unreal, except one thing: I am.
Michael,
Yes.
So wait a second. You're saying, so can it be? Is it the scenario? The scenario that our real nature, right, has to, know the unreal, I mean, to claim it as unreal, it has to demarcate it from the real, right?
Our real nature doesn't have to do anything. Our real nature just is as it is.
Okay, so can we say that our real nature can know the unreal as unreal?
No. The unreal appears only in the view of ego. All phenomena are unreal. Our real nature knows all this as real, not as all this phenomena. It knows it as pure awareness. What we see as all this phenomena is what pure awareness sees as pure awareness.
Well, then ego seems to have an advantage. He knows he has a touch of the real, and then he also has a touch of the unreal.
So we're better off. I know not only what is real, I also know what is unreal. So I'm better off than this poor real awareness, but knows only what is real.
Yes.
I don't think that's a very good bargain, because the unreal causes so much problem, and the unreal doesn't exist. We are knowing what doesn't exist as if it exists. Are you better off seeing the rope as a rope or seeing it as a snake? What you are seeing is only a rope, but so long as you see it as a snake, you are not seeing it as it is. So though we know the reality, which is I am, we don't know the reality as it is, because we know it as all this multiplicity.
But what I'm saying
reality is one. So long as we know it as multiplicity, we don't know it as it actually is.
The knowledge that this is a rope, but it can appear as a snake, supersedes the knowledge that this is a rope, right?
This is you're trying to view it from a mental point of view, from a perspective that is. These are just analogies. The point of the analogy is what actually exists is only the rope. So long as you see it as a snake, you are not seeing it as it is. But even when you're seeing it as a snake, what you are actually seeing is only a rope. So even when we see pure awareness, ourself, as all this, what we're actually seeing is only is only pure awareness, but we don't see pure awareness as it is. We see it as all this. In order if you want to know pure awareness as it is, you need to see it as it is, namely as just pure awareness. So long as we see multiplicity, as Bhagavan said, that is ignorance. Because what actually exists is only ourself, the pure awareness. This is verse 13. Oneself who is awareness alone is real. Awareness of multiplicity is ignorance, Bhagavan says there. So what's that mean? What we actually are is pure awareness. That alone is what is real. When we seemingly know all this multiplicity, that is, what are we seeing as that multiplicity? Only the one thing that actually exists. But we are seeing the one as many. That is ignorance. Knowledge is to see the one as one. And what is that one? That one is ourself. So long as we see ourselves as all this, we are not seeing ourselves as we actually are. So if we want to see ourselves as we actually are, we need to stop looking at all this and look at ourselves alone. When we look at ourselves alone, we will see that we alone are what actually exists.
Good. Thank you, Michael. Last question from Ram. Why do we get anxious?
Why do we get anxious? Because we see ourselves as many. And some of these many things that we see, some of them seem to contribute to our happiness. So we desire those things. We're attached to those things. Some of them seem to detract from our happiness. So we're anxious. But I shouldn't lose the things that make me happy. I shouldn't have to confront the things that make me unhappy. So anxiety is inevitable so long as we rise as ego. So long as we see ourselves as many, desire, fear, anxiety, all these things are inevitable. We can't, if you want to be free of desire, of attachment, of fear, of anxiety, and all these things, You need to see yourself as you actually are, because what you actually are is one and immutable. And it's the only one. There's nothing other than that. So there's nothing to be anxious about, nothing to fear, nothing to desire.
So self-attention is the best antidote for anxiety, panic attacks, and all those things.
Exactly. It's the best antidote for everything. It's the antidote for ego, which is the root cause of everything. For whom is anxiety? For whom is desire? For whom is fear? It's all only for ego. So if you cut the root by self-attention, by ego seems to exist only when we don't look at it. If we look at it, there's no such thing as ego to be found at all.
Since 2010, we've started doing the satsangs here in Houston. So many of our fellow devotees here have had their symptoms of anxiety improve with self-attention. As they practice more and more, so many of our fellow devotees here have benefited from it significantly.
Because that is, the more we go deep in this practice, the more we recognize that the one thing that is real is only our own being. Everything else is just a passing show. So why should we be, and the more we recognize the immutable nature of ourself and the unreal nature of everything else, the less we will be impacted by desire or fear. We haven't completely given up desire and fear and anxiety and everything, but these things, they're slowly fading into the background. They're losing their strength. But we shouldn't delude ourselves. Sometimes you may think, oh, now I've overcome anxiety, I'm no longer anxious, and suddenly something will happen to make us anxious. So we are not out of the woods until ego is annihilated. So we shouldn't think that we have in any way conquered Maya. But as a general rule, the deeper we go in this path, the more all these concerns will drop off. We will be more and more willing to take up the luggage off our head and leave it on the train. Surrender all our burden to Bhagavan. That will come automatically to the extent to which we go deep within.
So as a follow-up, Sandy is asking, how about when you're too overwhelmed by anxiety that you're not able to do self-attention? I guess that's when you do one of the bhakti practice or listen.
Ideally, we should be attending to ourselves all the time. But in practice, we fail so many times. Even when we're not overwhelmed by anxiety, we're carried away by our vasanas and so on and so forth. All we can do is to try to be self-attentive as much as possible. So doesn't matter how many times we fail, so long as we keep on trying, that's all that matters. When we feel so overwhelmed, but though we'd like to cling to self-attentiveness, we feel unable to, pray to Bhagavan. Or pick up Bhagavan's books and read what Bhagavan has said. That will calm down the mind and put everything back in perspective and make it easier for us to turn within again.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Michael.
Right. And someone has written here, I had panic attacks until... Sorry, I had
panic attacks until I insisted that I sit quietly, either meditating or in self-attentiveness 3 times a day for at least 10 minutes. It was quite difficult, like facing an inner fire, but it ebbed quite quickly in a few days' times. Yeah.
I think this is we will all have experienced if we're following this path, but the concerns of the past slowly drop off. Though we still have concerns and things that trouble us even now, they somehow make less impact now. Slowly things are dropping off. But this is a process we're going through. We have to persevere in this practice, because then only without the perseverance in the practice, how can we experience the benefits of practice unless we persevere in it? So let us just do our best, try to be self-attentive as much as we can be. That's all that we can do. And everything else will be taken care of by Bhagavan.
Thank you, Michael. I just got now what you said. Basically, infinity plus a little bit doesn't make any sense, right?
Yes.
It's still infinity.
Yes. There's a mantra in one of the Upanishads. This is Purna, that is Purna. This is Purna means this world is Purna. That Brahman is Purna. If you take Purna away from Purna, you're left with Purna. And if you add Purna back into Purna, you have Purna. Purna means what is whole. So yes, there's nothing but we can add to our real nature. Our real nature is infinite fullness. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramana Center.